this was the incredible humility that happened to Isaiah when he came into the presence of God. This was the result of Isaiah seeing the holiness of God. And when Isaiah saw God in a new way, he also saw himself in a new way. He saw himself in a whole new light that he'd never thought of or seen before. And they go together. As we see God in new ways, we see ourselves in new ways. And if we are not open to recognizing our smallness and our sinfulness, we will never take in, his greatness and his holiness. I want to continue my series on prayer. Siri, I'm not talking to you.
Siri said,
I used the word series, and Siri thought I was talking to her, so but she keeps me out of trouble. At least she gets me where I'm supposed to be going, that's for sure, so that's good. But this teaching on prayer, I think it's important that we understand prayer for what it really is on a kind of an overall big scheme, which is you and I are given an audience with a Creator. That's such an incredible thought. But then there are things that should happen in our lives when we come before this infinite being who is all wisdom, all power, but all love and compassion. And we're going to read a passage of scripture that shows a prophet who came into the presence of God. And this prophet had been pronouncing woes upon the nation of Israel because of their sin. He had been a man of prayer. He had been a holy man. And one encounter in a deeper way with God changed everything for him. We'll see that in a moment. But I just want to cover two main ideas today. The first is that real, true, heartfelt prayer, when we're really in a proper place of communication with God, it creates a real honest assessment of oneself. How many know that you really can't come into the presence of God in an honest way without doing some self-reflecting? Right? And I think when we do this self-reflecting in light of God's presence, we begin to understand in a clearer way our nature and our character. I'm sure many of you have talked with people during the course of your life, and you have a conversation, and that inevitably evolves into something to this effect, where this person will say, well, I'm not such a bad person. And because I'm not such a bad person, I should be given all these eternal benefits, right? And I think religion has obviously contributed to that a lot. Not a relationship with Christ, but religion has, because all religions are basically based on a set of do's and don'ts. I grew up mostly in a system of religion that was focused on the don'ts rather than the do's. And eventually, there were people who would say, man, can't you do anything? Right? What do you do for fun? All right, But getting back to prayer really can't truly begin without proper humility on our part. Now, I know that if you're a soldier in a foxhole and there's incoming mortars, you're probably not thinking about humility, right? You're thinking about help, right?
That's humble.
Yeah. But in order for someone to call for help, they have to recognize something about their current condition. And that is what?
They need help.
Yeah, they can't save themselves. I got the most incredible story about a friend of mine. Jackie and I, years ago, back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were living in the Detroit area, Farmington Hills. And there was a guy that was coming to our church there that we were part of. And he was a Navy SEAL. So this guy was like a man's man. And his job in the Vietnam War was to go behind enemy lines, capture high-ranking Viet Cong officers, and smuggle them to the South.
He was Rambo.
He was Rambo. Yeah, that's a great analogy. He was Rambo. And so we're talking, and he's explaining to me how he was working on his car. And he had it jacked up, and he's under the car, and all of a sudden he sees the jack starting to do this. And he grabbed this heavy-duty screwdriver with a plastic handle and stuck it under the frame of the car as the jack fell over. And the car starts to crush the plastic handle. And it gets all the way down through the plastic handle, and just a metal screwdriver is holding the car up, but it's pinning him underneath. And I said to this Navy SEAL, Rambo, what did you do? He said, I did the first thing that came to my mind. I yelled, help! He understood no matter how Rambo-ish he was, he needed help. I don't know if Rambo-ish is a word, but you know what I mean by that. It is now, okay. And that's the whole thing about prayer. Prayer can't truly begin without humility being in us. Because when we come before the Lord, yes, we can come in worship and praise and all of those wonderful aspects of relationship with God. But let's face it, most of the prayers that we pray are about something that we need. And when you need something, there's a self-recognition that I can't get this or do this or accomplish this just on my own. And so there's a humility that comes. So one of the things that true prayer creates is an honest assessment of oneself. And I get frustrated at times when I hear people just kind of mouth prayerful platitudes that they have without really living in reality. And I know I'm not here to argue with anybody, but faith is not denying your symptoms. Okay? Faith is not denying your reality. So, for example, when the leper came to Jesus, Jesus said to him, "What do you want?" And what did the man say? "I want you to heal me of my leprosy." And Jesus didn't say, "Don't admit it. Don't confess that." You see, when we actually admit what we have, there's a humility in it, and it puts us in a place of saying, I need you, God.
That's good.
I need you. Blind Bartimaeus, what do you want? I want to see. Jesus said, don't agree that you can't see. He didn't say that. He said, what do you want? And when we go before God with whatever, Jackie's got a hip issue, and she might need a hip replacement. But we're praying, God, touch this thing. Yes. Touch this thing. And there's a recognition of what we need in this situation that we can't achieve ourselves. We need God's help. And when we come to a place of understanding that, it creates a humility in us,
That's very good.
doesn't it? It creates a lack of, I can do this myself, right? And so it's a simple fact that the nearer we get to a supreme beauty, supreme intelligence, or the purity of God, the more we become aware of our own unsightliness, right? The more we become aware of our own impurity, as much as we are still committed to trying to serve Jesus, and our lives are so much different than they were before Jesus came into our lives, right? We're still aware of our own dullness, our own impurity, our own unsightliness. And nearly all wisdom consists of two parts. First, the knowledge of God, and then the knowledge of ourselves.
That's really good.
The knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. And we can't come to know God better without coming at the same time to know ourselves better. Right? Let me say it again. We can't come to know God better without at the same time coming to know ourselves better. But it also works the other way. And let me explain that. If I'm in denial about my own weakness or my own sin or my own fears or my own shortcomings, if I'm in denial about those things, there will also be an accompanying blindness in my eyes to the goodness and the greatness of God.
So good.
Right?
That's good.
So it works both ways. You know, the more you get to know God, the more you're revealed about yourself. But if you live in denial about yourself, well, I'm not such a bad person, right? It's interesting. If you look at the chronology of the Apostle Paul's life, at the beginning of his ministry, he's pretty, sometimes it can feel like he's hard on the church, right? He's hard on people. At the end of his life, you know how he describes himself? I'm the chiefest of sinners. That was how he described himself, because through his life, from the time on the road to Damascus to the time that he was executed, he had several multitude of encounters with God. And the more he encountered God, the more he saw how beautiful God was, how powerful God was, how holy God was, and how much was lacking in his life. So, I want to go to Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. This is an incredible story of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah is thought of as one of the giants of the Old Testament. And he has pronounced several woes on the nation of Israel. And he's pretty much fed up with Israel. Okay? He's pretty much fed up with Israel. And then one day, he is in prayer, and God gives him an incredible encounter, and he sees God in a way that he'd never seen him before. Here's
I love the scriptures that describe heaven or things going on, like we sang about Jesus coming back. And I just like to close my eyes and use my imagination
It's so good.
to picture what the fantasticness of
Yes,
it.
yes.
I don't think that's a word either. Fantasticness.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a good word.
Okay, it was in the year of King Uzziah. It was in the year King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Attending him were mighty seraphim, each having 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 wings they covered their feet. And with 2 they flew. And they were calling out to each other, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory." Their voices shook the temple to its foundations, and the entire building was filled with smoke.
Have you ever been to, like, First Avenue gone to an event there? Anybody? Of like a half a dozen of you. Well, what you really need to do is go there when a punk band is playing. Because that is like a fulfillment of this verse.
You went with our boys.
Where their voices shook the temple to its foundations. It's so loud at First Avenue.
And smoke rises.
And smoke and everything else. And it's like, you wonder, are these walls going to fall down? By the way, wear earplugs when you go there. Don't wear headphones, but just, wear earplugs. And that's the first time in my life that I actually felt music right here. I felt it. It was pounding against my chest. But that's kind of what is like happening here. These creatures, these seraphim, see, we see pictures of little seraphim like little baby angels. That is not the seraphim in heaven. The seraphim in heaven are these incredible creatures. I'm not even sure how many there were, but it didn't say there's millions of them. They're flying around the throne, and they have these incredibly deep, profound voices that shake the very foundations of the temple of heaven. And they're saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies." So just kind of get that picture in your mind for a second, and then kind of assess how frivolently at times we come into the presence of God. And we come before God, and we just don't at times have the awe and the wonder that he really warrants and deserves. But let's go on. So after they say this, and their voices shook the temple, and the whole place was filled with smoke, here's what Isaiah said.
Then I said, "It's all over. I am doomed.
I am doomed.
For I am a sinful man. I have filthy lips, and I live among a people of filthy lips. Yet I have seen the King, the Lord of heaven's armies."
Isn't this interesting? So here is this holy man of God, prophet, who comes into a deeper encounter with the living God. And the first thing he says about himself, it's all over for me. It was a recognition of the gap, the contrast between the righteousness of God and where his righteousness was. And he goes on to say, "I am a sinful man." And I would dare say that when any of us come into the real presence of God, I remember years ago, Wurmbrand came to our church. If you don't know who he is, Richard Wurmbrand. If you don't know who he is, he was a minister in Romania under Ceausescu. And he was greatly persecuted and put in prison, was in chains, and so much so that his feet and arms and hands were permanently damaged from being enchained so long. And he said that the sound that the chains made was the music instruments that he used to worship God with. And he came to our church, and I felt like I was in the presence of holiness. And he was a man. And I can guarantee you, if he would have been in the place of Isaiah, he would have said the same thing that Isaiah said. "I am a man of unclean lips. I am doomed. I am among a people of unclean lips." And this was the incredible humility that happened to Isaiah when he came into the presence of God. This was the result of Isaiah seeing the holiness of God. And when Isaiah saw God in a new way, he also saw himself in a new way. He saw himself in a whole new light that he'd never thought of or seen before. And they go together. As we see God in new ways, we see ourselves in new ways. And if we are not open to recognizing our smallness and our sinfulness, we will never take in, his greatness and his holiness. We'll never do that.
I just want to say for a moment that when we gather together, the scriptures say where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst, right here in us.
Yes.
And when we worship together, I was thinking that this morning, we sang 2 songs where we exhorted each other. And we sang 2 songs that were specifically talking straight to God.
Yeah.
They were prayers.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage us all, me too, that when we are in this place and we invite God here with us and we're singing to him and we believe that his word is true, that he's here with us, that we can enter into a special place of his presence.
Yeah.
But it's something that we have to
Focus on. It's a realization.
And it's a realization.
So I'm sure you all remember the movie Jaws. And my favorite line in the movie Jaws is, "We need a bigger boat." Do you remember that line? We need a big, they're out there, we're going to go after this shark, right? And then the shark swings by the boat, and it's bigger than the boat. And we need a bigger boat. That was the kind of realization that happened to Isaiah. That's the kind of realization that we need to ask God for. In all of our human relationships, the fact of the matter is we only reveal a part of who we are. And you know what? Even to your spouses, we only reveal a part. I do not tell Jackie every single thought that I have in my mind. She would not like me if I told her every single thought that I have in my mind. That's, part of the reason one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control, is that you don't say every thought that comes to your mind.
I'll have to remember that.
Right?
I mean, that I say most things that come to my mind.
But you have such pure thoughts all the time.
Actually, I don't tell you everything.
Well, of course.
I don't tell you every thought I have.
I
Okay.
would hope you wouldn't. I don't know that I have that much forgiveness in me, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter what relationship we're in, whether it's a business partner, a good friend, a spouse, a father, a son, whatever the relationship is, we only expose, in all those relationships, we only expose a part of who we are. But with God, we stand completely exposed. Hebrews 4:13 says this.
Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable.
That's kind of a wake up kind of verse, isn't it? Nothing in all of creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. All of our masks are gone. Pretense is useless with God. And the fact of the matter is, with God, our relationship with God can't be partial. We can lie to each other. We can say, "You're my best friend," and then go talk behind someone's back. We can say, "I love you with all my heart, as long as you do what I want you to do." That's what we say quietly, right? And the fact of the matter is, we can't do that with God and him not be aware of it. We can't. And the one thing that God actually is asking of us is that we are totally honest with him. When you are fearful, it's okay to let him know that. When you have doubts, it's okay to let him know that. When you have questions, it's okay to let him know that. When you have fears, anxiety, it's okay to let him know that. You know why? Because he already knows it.
And saying it, we know it.
So we're not saying it for his sake. You know, I said, God, I'm really afraid right now. I'm really fearful. I got so much anxiety. And he said, you do? You know, I might say to you, I'm really anxious about this. When you would say, well, you don't look like it, right? That's our response to each other, right? But with God, when we are honest with him, he says, thank you for recognizing where you're at. Now I can really work in your life. So that's the first thing that happens in prayers. We really get to have an honest assessment of where we're at, and hopefully we can see God in such a greater way that this natural humility will begin to happen. The other thing that I believe happens, this is another thing, not the other thing. Another thing that happens is that prayer can create really restful trust, but at the same time, a confident hope. So, and they're not the same thing, and I'll explain it in here a second. Just as prayer must combine awe and intimacy, that's what we've just been talking about, having this awe which creates intimacy. It also must create a submission to God, right? When we come before God, we have to have a heart of submission to God. However, he also wants us to have a persistent knocking on the door of heaven, often to the point of being overly troublesome to the person whose door you're knocking on. And we have a great story about that in Luke, where Jesus tells this story.
Then, teaching them more about prayer,
Again,
he used
teaching about prayer, right?
Suppose you went to a friend's house at midnight, wanting to borrow 3 loaves of bread, and you say to him, a friend of mine has just arrived for a visit, and I have nothing for him to eat. And suppose he calls out from his bedroom, don't bother me. The door is locked for the night, and my family and I are all in bed. I can't help you. But I tell you this, though he won't do it for friendship's sake, if you keep knocking long enough, he will get up and give you whatever you need because of your shameless persistence.
Isn't that good? We should have shameless persistence before God. There's a fancy word. It's not used too often in our culture, but it's called importunity, not opportunity, importunity. And it means knocking on someone's door until you frustrate them.
Importunity.
Yeah. Jackie and I like to watch the program Young Sheldon. And Sheldon is this brainiac guy. And he's very much what we would call on the spectrum. But he's always persistent, always asking. And one time he asked his mom, did you give this to me because you love me or just because I wore you down? Right? Well, in the same way, this parable is teaching us that we need to have this persistent attitude. Just keep on knocking, keep on asking. And the ultimate end of every prayer of petition that we pray must be for the fact that we need help. We need something. We need help. And we need to thankfully accept God's, or accept from God what he's going to give us. So there's where the submission part comes into play. We're to thankfully accept what he gives us, but on the other hand, we're also invited to repeatedly make our needs known to him. I'm going to read a portion of scripture here momentarily that shows this story greatly. I guess you can say that prayer is not a passive, calm, quiet practice. There needs to be real persistency. There needs to be real knocking. And the best way for me to describe it is that there needs to be a balance between this restful trust as well as the keep on knocking part. And I remember having been around people who, and I appreciate their submission to the Lord in this, but every prayer is whatever your will is, God, whatever your will is. And they become so passive in that they just accept whatever happens. And I think as believers, we need to see that there's spiritual warfare going on, and not everything is predetermined, and that we can have a part in the direction of how things end up being by our prayers and by our choices we make and so forth. And there's this, I really liked the books that came out, I don't know how many years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, but like This Present Darkness and some of those books that really put into a clearer picture this whole spiritual warfare stuff that takes place, that so many people, see, Hollywood loves to make movies of witches and demons and the devil, but the minute you start talking about praying and binding them, you're thought of as a nut. Right? But the reality is, Jesus bound Satan and the demonic realm on several occasions. Several occasions.
And in those books, it's so cool. And it has changed when I pray, because as the people gathered and prayed, the angels
More
would come.
angels would come.
Yes.
Yeah.
The pictures that book gave
And
us.
the more intense the prayer, the greater strength, as it were, the angels of the Lord would have in fighting against the demonic powers. So there's another great story about this keeping on knocking. And we find it in Genesis chapter 18, where God has declared, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm going to wipe this city out. And Abraham is now going before God to, shall we say, change his mind.
Abraham approached him and said, God, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find 50 righteous people living here in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Why, you would be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right?
Can you imagine kind of just standing before God and kind of saying, you're not going to do that? You know? I mean, surely you're not going to do that.
That comes from quite a deep relationship.
Yes, very good.
Yes.
And the Lord replied,
And the Lord replied, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake.
now I can just see Abraham's wheels turning now. He thought, I started too high. You know, like when you're negotiating a deal, ooh, I should have started in a different spot, right? So then he thought, I'm just going to test the waters here. I'm going to be like this Luke parable. And he says this.
Then Abraham spoke again. Since I have begun, let me speak further to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes.
So he recognizes his legitimate place.
Suppose there are only 45 righteous people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there.
Oop, maybe again I'm too high.
Then Abraham pressed his request further. Suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 40. Please don't be angry, my Lord, Abraham pleaded. Let me speak. Suppose only 30 righteous people are found. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it if I find 30. Then Abraham said, since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there are only 20. And the Lord replied, then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Finally, Abraham said, Lord, please don't be angry with me if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 are found there. And the Lord replied, then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. When the Lord had finished his conversation with Abraham, he went on his way, and Abraham returned to his tent.
Now, the problem with Abraham in this prayer is he should have knocked one or two more times. Because the Psalms teach us that God has said this, that he will save a city for one righteous person. One righteous person. And this is a great example of keeping on knocking and how God responds to it. And I think it's as I've been saying the last couple of weeks, it's good to ask largely in petitionary prayer and to keep on asking. But we also need to have a foundation of a settled acceptance of God's wisdom, too. There has to be a balance. There has to be a balance. God is a sovereign God, and I know that we could debate all day long about what that means, and I have a definition of it, what is comfortable for me. And that may not be where you're comfortable with in terms of understanding the sovereignty of God. But if we don't have this real balance between keeping on asking, keeping on knocking, and also accepting God's wisdom and sovereignty, we will at times become angry when our prayers aren't answered in the way that we want them to be. So we always have to have this balance. And I think if there's one thing that I would encourage everybody to understand in following Jesus is that he is a balanced God. He does things in balance. He really does. I want to finish with this. I read an article recently about how they do mining in Norway. If you've ever been to Norway, you know Norway is like one big rock. It's just, they have about 2 feet of topsoil, and then you hit rock in Norway. If you go out in one of our fields here, you can dig down, and you get 10 feet down, you get to virgin clay. They call it virgin clay here, and it's so hard, it's 10,000 PSI on just dirt, and it's incredible. But in Norway, you get 3 or 4 feet down below the surface of the ground, and you start hitting rock. But there's an incredible amount of ore and minerals and stuff in Norway, and they've perfected a way of mining that, and I think this pertains actually to prayer a little bit. And what they do is they drill these holes, bore holes deep into the ground with special drilling equipment, and they do it very strategically, where the minerals are at and what they're trying to do, what they're trying to get out, et cetera, et cetera. And it takes steadiness, it takes skill to discern where to drill and all that sort of stuff. And then dynamite is placed in these holes, and someone comes along and lights a fuse. Now, the fact of the matter is anybody can light a fuse. I could go and light a fuse, and it wouldn't make me a miner. I'm not someone under 18, but a person who mines in Norway, right? And here's the point. Anybody can light a fuse, while the painstaking work of drilling takes really wisdom, perseverance, strategy, and that's what prayer is like. We need to have the patient prayer life of hole boring. We need to keep praying. We need to keep praying. I prayed last Sunday with a couple whose son has been wayward for years. And I just prayed over them, and I said, listen, God has a target on your son. And no amount of philosophy, demonic activity can keep the sun from penetrating, the light from penetrating into his life. So hold on. Just keep strategically praying for your son. And at times we need to strategically pray rather than just keep lighting fuses of dynamite all over the place that don't have any real effect. And so mature believers know that handling the tedium of what makes for effective prayers is really very important to us. And we have to learn how to avoid extremes. We have to be willing to ask God for things large or small. Remember, you were talking recently to someone who said, yeah, I was told by my mom that God doesn't, he's too busy. Yeah, God's
He's too busy for the small things.
Yeah, he's too busy for the small things.
And most of everything she thought she asked was too
Was
small.
Right. And so we implore you, small or large, keep asking before the Lord. And yet, don't ever fall into the trap of thinking you can bend God's will to your will. Okay? Don't fall into that trap. You can't bend God's will to your will anytime that we want. Just all we have to do is say in Jesus' name, and then we're going to get what we want. That is not what that means. And I'll do some teaching on that in the near future. But in the end, we have to combine striving with God with a deep acceptance of the wisdom, the wise will, whatever it may be. And always remember this, that God is a covenant-keeping God. God is a covenant-keeping God. If you forget everything else I said today, remember that God is a covenant-keeping God. He keeps his word. He listens to your prayers. He bottles every single one of them up. He holds them dear to his heart. And at just the right time, he will pour out his answers. Pastor Jeff, would you come?
The scripture, as Jeff comes, the scriptures talk about the bowls up in heaven.
Yes.
And our prayers go into the bowls.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And he bottles up our tears.
Yes.
It's
yes.
beautiful.
And he pours them out.
Pours them out.
At the right time. At the right time.